Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is elbow. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear elbow used is to mean to strike someone or something with one's elbows, right? So I'm using the noun form of this word. It's part of our body. And so you might imagine someone doing kind of this action to hit or strike something or someone. Second way, and a bit related, would be to move by pushing past people. So you might imagine people moving through a crowd using kind of their elbows to help get them past. A third way you'll hear the verb elbow used is to mean to treat someone or something dismissively, right? So this is like a figurative elbow, right? We're dismissing someone or someone's idea without giving it much thought or consideration. A fourth way you'll hear the verb elbow used is to mean to turn at an angle or to bend. So again, kind of describing this shape that's created with our body. You should know that elbow is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, all you need to do is add ing to form elbowing. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by just adding ed. Our base verb, elbow, o, ends in a vowel sound, a long o sound. So our past tense ending is just going to make a d sound. And we're not going to add an extra syllable as we say it. It should sound like this: elbowed, elbowed. Okay? Now, there are a couple phrasal verbs that we'll discuss next. The first is to elbow aside. Many times people use this again to kind of tie back to the second definition. So you're physically pushing past someone or something to get to something else. An example of this might be, they elbowed me aside to get to the front of the line. So again, you might be able to kind of visualize or imagine a crowd of people or people sort of pushing in order to reach a certain place. Another phrasal verb you might hear is to elbow out or elbow out of. And this goes back more to the third definition of this verb. So here, this is a figurative, not a literal elbow, but to pressure someone to leave something. An example of this might be, the CEO was elbowed out of her role because the board wanted new leadership. So here, maybe this person wasn't fired, but they were saying, you've got to go, resign, resign, right? Telling this person to quit. So pressured to leave. The last phrasal verb you might encounter is to elbow through. This goes back to forcing someone's way, generally through a crowd. We're pushing past using our elbows. An example of this: I elbowed my way through the crowd to get to the bathroom. Right? So maybe you're at a concert, a large sporting event, right? We can kind of envision having to push past, especially if it's an emergency. Now, let's continue using our verb of the day, elbow, in a couple different verb tenses. Today, we're going to practice the present perfect and the simple future using be going to. Let's start with the present perfect. We use this verb tense to talk about an action that occurred at some unknown point in the past tense, or we use it to talk about an action that started in the past and continues into the present. So we might be using it with a time period that isn't over yet. Okay. So to form the present perfect, what we're going to do is pay attention to our subject. If our subject is I, you, we, or they, I'm going to use have, and then I'm going to use my participle form of the verb. If my subject is he, she, or it, I'll use has, and then the participle form. Okay? And here, because elbow is a regular form, our participle form is that ed ending. So the World Cup is beginning this week. And so you might hear a sentence like this: he's elbowed so many players in the first half. Right? So as you watch soccer here in the United States, football everywhere else, right? We might see players do this to get in position, to take control of a ball or to shoot, to pass, etc. If I want to make a negative present perfect sentence, again, I'm going to pay attention to my subject. Based on what it is, I'll use have or has. Then I'll use not, and then the participle form. Here's another example. We haven't elbowed our way to the front yet, and I don't think we will. Right? So, again, you might envision someone at a really crowded event and sharing this thought of like, do we want to move forward? It's going to take some effort to try and make room for ourselves at the front of something. Lastly, we'll look at making a yes or no question in the present perfect. To do this, we start with have or has, whichever form matches our subject, and that subject comes next, then our participle form of the verb. Here's another example. Has she elbowed out rivals for the top spot? So here, this might be that more figurative meaning of kind of like pushing one's way to the top, earning some sort of title or position. This might not be a literal movement with one's elbow. Now let's move on and talk about the simple future. Today we're going to practice using be going to. This is really common when for people making plans. You might also hear some people use it to make predictions, what they think is going to happen in the future. When we use be going to make simple future sentences, we need to pay attention to our subject. So the form of be is going to change. My subject is I'll use am. If my subject is he, she, or it, I'll use is. And if my subject is you, we, or they, I will use are. Okay, so I'm using a form of be, am, is, or are. Then I'm going to use going to and the base verb. I'm not putting any special endings on the end of this verb. An example of this might be, the new traffic lanes are going to elbow to the right. Okay? This sentence ties back to the fourth definition of the verb we looked at earlier. So talking about something bending, something moving at an angle. And maybe these are our plans, construction plans for new lanes or additional lanes on a particular highway. Now let's look at a negative sentence in the simple future. To do this, again, we pay attention to our subject and we're going to match the form of be. Then we'll use not, then going to, and our base verb. Here's another example. You aren't going to elbow anyone to get a deal if you're shopping online from home. So now we are nearing Black Friday in the United States. It's sort of like a major shopping extravaganza in anticipation for Christmas. Many retailers have large sales, and sometimes as they open the doors, you have crowds of people trying to run in, and they are pushing and elbowing each other in order to maybe get a particular item at a great price. But here, you can avoid doing this action if you just shop online. Now, let's look at making a yes or no question in the simple future. To do this, we start with a form of be, so am, is, or are. Then we have our subject, then going to, and the base verb. Here's another example. Is the new player going to elbow her way into the starting lineup? So this might be that kind of push aside, try and get a starting spot on this particular team. You see elbow used a lot in connection to sports. It was pretty easy for me to make a couple of these examples because it is something I feel like I've heard or I've read because I do enjoy watching and reading about sports. Now, let's spend a moment to look at some words and phrases related to elbow. The first word we're going to talk about is the noun form. Okay, so same spelling, same pronunciation. You probably hear elbow used as a noun more frequently than you do as a verb, and we're just talking about this joint between our forearm and our upper arm. So, an example of this, he fell on his elbow after slipping. A second way you hear the noun elbow used is to refer to something that has a bend or an angle in it. So, kind of thinking of this shape one's elbow makes. So, an example here. I think we need to replace the elbow pipe. Right? So many times as you think of pipes, you might think of something that is long and straight, but they do make special pieces that have a little bend into them. They're called elbows. Another noun you might encounter is elbow grease. Now, this might sound like a funny phrase, but it's a way to describe hard physical work, right? So, for many people who've heard and listened to English for years and years, when they hear this phrase, they really think of someone scrubbing something, right? So you're using a lot of your upper body strength. And I think that's how we got this term. But really, any sort of hard physical work is appropriate for us to use this phrase. So, an example here: it's going to take a great deal of elbow grease to get all these rooms painted. So, right, we're talking about physical labor. Now, the last, second to last, I think. Yeah, nope, the last. See, some days I forget. The last thing we're going to talk about is our phrase to be up to one's elbows in something. Now, this phrase can have a couple different meanings. Some people use it to just describe when they're very, very busy. So, how you might hear it used would be like, I've been up to my elbows in paperwork all week, right? So, for some of us, we might like envision kind of stacks and stacks of papers. A second way, though, you'll hear people use it is to talk about being overwhelmed with a large quantity or a large amount of something. An example of this might be, the charity is up to its elbows in donated coats, gloves, and scarves. So this time of year and kind of the months leading up to it, many charities ask for people to donate old or unused coats, gloves, and scarves so that they can be shared to keep people warm in the winter. And I recently heard that a local drive had been so successful, the particular nonprofit or charity in this case had so many more coats, gloves, and scarves than really knew what to do with it. So they were overwhelmed by this large amount. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.